All right, who is ready to doodle? For this tutorial video, I am going to be showing you how we can draw and doodle on top of a photograph using the Procreate app. This can be a really fun and no pressure way to get comfortable drawing digitally and start playing around with the app. The new skills we will be learning in this lesson will build off of the basic skills we learned in the first video for this week, so make sure you go watch that detailed Procreate app basics video first. You'll see here that I've put the video time code for where you can find each skill learned in this lesson. So if there is a specific skill you want to refer back to, you can look at this, find the time, and easily navigate to that part of the video. So let's get started. So for this project, since we are going to be doodling on top of a photograph, we need a photograph to doodle on top of. So I have put some images in the classroom that you can use and doodle on top of. For this tutorial, I'm going to be working with this retro van camper photograph. I put some other ones that you can play around with in the classroom as well, but I highly recommend taking your own photographs as well and doodling on top of some of your own photos. So before we get started, I did want to show you some inspiration that you can also use to create your own doodle illustrations. So here I just have a Pinterest board. Pinterest is a great website to search and save for inspiration images for your illustrations. So here there are lots of different ideas that we can do with illustrating on top of photographs. Even just small doodles like this can really make an image pop and can be a lot of fun. So if you want to use one of these images and you don't have them on your iPad yet, I'm just going to do that really quick. So I find the easiest way to get your images onto your iPad is just to log into Outschool on your iPad. Use Safari as your web browser. Find the image you want in the classroom. Go ahead and just tap it. Tap download this file. Tap the share icon at the top and then go down to save image. That should save the image to your iPad photo library. So now that we have our image, I've just navigated back to the Procreate app. And now instead of starting with a blank canvas, I'm actually going to import a photo. So to do that, I'm just going to tap Photo. And now I've just navigated to where I have the photo saved for this class. So I'm going to tap to import that retro van photo. And you'll see it has imported this and created the canvas size based on the dimensions or the size of the photograph. So let's go up here to our layers. So our layers is this icon, the square in front of the square. So if I tap that, we'll see it's imported the photograph as our layer 1. So I can check and uncheck this to hide the photo or show the photo. So remember, I'm not deleting it, I'm just hiding it. And you'll always have this background color layer here if you remember. So right from the start, we are going to create each new element of our doodle illustration on a new and separate layer. That way it makes it easier to manipulate and edit elements on different layers without messing everything else up. So basically what I mean here is you don't have to follow along with this, but I just want to show you an example. Let's grab my paintbrush, and if I want to draw on this image here, and then I want to actually erase, you'll notice when I'm erasing, I'm also erasing my photograph. And that's because I've created this brushstroke on the same layer as my photograph. So that won't do. So I'm going to use 2 fingers and just go ahead and tap to undo and get back to my nice clean photograph. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new layer. So to do that, I'll just tap this plus sign, and now I have layer 2. So now whenever I create any sort of doodles and I want to edit or erase them, it's not going to erase my photograph. So for this doodle illustration, I am going to first choose my paintbrush. So I'll tap the paint tool, tap it again to open up my brush library. And the brush I'm going to be using for this is in the inking folder. And the brush is called Syrup. So now that I have my brush, I'm going to choose my color. So I think the first thing I'm going to draw on this photograph is a sun. So I'm going to go to my colors. I'll scroll up here. Now I've already saved my colors for this class and made my color palettes. Go back in the classroom and watch that video where I show you how to save the colors as these palettes if you haven't watched that yet. So for this illustration, I'm going to be using colors from this funky retro color palette. So for the sun, I'm going to go ahead and tap this yellow color, and you'll see when I tapped one of these squares, it moved that checkbox up here to this funky retro palette. So now whenever I go through these different color selecting windows or options, I'll always see my funky retro color palette because it is set as my default color palette. So I'll go ahead and use this yellow, double check my layers, make sure I'm on that new blank layer, and tap off to close. And I'll just zoom in here, and I think I'm going to make my sun coming up from behind these cliffs. Now, as you go through these lessons, I encourage you to, if you feel more comfortable copying me exactly, feel free, or you can kind of make things your own. It's really up to you. So I'm going to draw my sun. I'm going to do a practice brush stroke just to see how thick my brush is. So maybe I'll make it just a little thicker, moving this top slider to make my brush tip a little bigger. And if you make a brush stroke and you're not happy with it, using those two fingers and tapping is a lot quicker than grabbing your eraser and erasing it. So I'll draw a few arches, and then I'll have some sun rays coming off. Now, I'm starting with a lighter pressure with my pencil and then pressing down a little harder near the end. And that's to get this nice varied line weight. So when I say line weight, I'm talking about how thick my line is. So if I say heavy line weight, I'm talking about a nice thick line. And if I say thin line weight, I'm talking about a nice thin line like this. And just remember, if you are using your finger or another stylus besides an Apple Pencil, you may not be able to achieve this varied or differing line pressure or line weight throughout. So now that I have my happy yellow sun, I'm going to go up to my layers. And before I add anything else, I'm going to add a new layer. So I'm just going to keep my sun on this layer. And another good way to stay organized with your layers and remind yourself to only keep one element on each layer is to actually rename your layers. So if you tap the layer and then tap it again, you'll get some options that come up here. And we're going to be going over a lot more of these throughout other lessons in this course. But for now, let's go ahead and just tap rename. And now I can name these. So I'll name this photo. So only my photo is going to go on that layer. I'll tap layer 2, tap it again, tap rename, and this will be my sun. And I think for this layer 3, I'm going to go ahead and put some clouds on this layer. So for these clouds, I'm going to go back to my colors, and I want to make these a nice crisp white, but I don't have that in my color palette, but that's okay. I can just go to this classic color option, and if I just bring my selector all the way to the tippy top left corner, that'll be a nice crisp white. I'll tap off to close that. Double check my layers, make sure I'm on this clouds layer. So whatever layer you have selected will be highlighted in blue. So whatever layer you have selected in that blue highlight, that is where your brush strokes are going to be made in. So I will just now make some big fluffy clouds. And also just a reminder, I have my brush opacity here all the way up to 100%. Because I don't want any of these brush strokes to be transparent or see-through at all. I want it to be nice and solid. Draw another cloud here, and maybe one coming off the page over here. Now, there are a few different ways we can fill in the color here. So I can just go through and paint, which can be nice and relaxing, but can take a little bit of time. So a faster way to do this is by doing a color drop. So to do that, we're just going to take this circle of color up here, the circle you would tap to open up your colors. And what we're going to do is you're just going to tap and keep your pencil down on the screen and drag that color off. So you see how I have this floating color circle of white here? So I can basically just come over here and drop that color where I want to fill. So now it has filled that shape for me really quickly. So I can do that for my other clouds as well. Now, something to be careful with when you're doing your color drop is if I have a shape like this, but it's not quite closed, see how it's open right here? If I try and do my color drop, uh-oh, it's going to fill my whole layer. See how it's filled that entire layer? That's because my shape wasn't completely closed. So you need to make sure your shapes are completely closed before you do that color drop. Okay, now that I have some clouds here, I think I actually want my sun to be in front of my clouds. So the way we can change that is we can go to our layers and we can actually rearrange these layers to whatever order we want. So if I tap and hold these clouds and drag that under the sun, now my sun is in the front of my clouds. So whatever is at the top of your layers is going to be showing in the foreground or more towards the top of your illustration, and whatever is down at the bottom is going to be behind or in the background. So now I think I would like to add some fun waves. So I'm going to tap the plus sign to add a new layer. And you might have noticed whatever layer you have selected, when you tap that plus sign to add a new layer, it's going to add it directly above the layer that you had selected. So I'm going to tap this, tap rename, and I'm going to name it waves. And I'll go to my colors and select this dark teal color from my palette. Double check my layers, make sure I'm on that waves layer. And now I'm going to go ahead and maybe change this shoreline, make it nice and wavy, and I'll add some waves in here. And I'm stopping right here because I'd like these waves to look like they are going behind the van. All right, now this pole should be in front of these waves. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually erase this. So I need to make sure I'm erasing with a nice smooth brush here. So for example, if I had this brush selected as my eraser, this doesn't really do what I want it to do, right? So I want to actually be erasing with this syrup brush because it's nice and smooth. So if you are painting with a certain brush and you want to erase with that same brush shape, all you have to do is tap and hold this eraser and it will change the eraser brush shape to the current brush you are using. So that can save you time if you don't want to tap to open this and find the brush. So there we go. Now it looks like my pole is in the foreground. Something else I want to show you, you may notice when I am drawing or I'm erasing, you can see the outline of my brush. If you want to turn that on, if that's not showing up for you, the way you can do that is tap this little wrench icon in the top left corner and then go to where it says Prefs. This stands for Preferences. And then you can turn this brush cursor on if you want to see the outline. I find that helpful. Some people find it distracting. It's really up to you. So you can turn that on and off. All right, now I want to draw some outlines around this van and really make it pop. So for this, I'm going to first add a new layer. And I will tap and rename, and I will name this outline. And I'll go ahead and pick this bubblegum pink color from our palette. Now with this syrup brush, it's kind of difficult to keep one single line weight all the way around if you're using an Apple Pencil. So I think I'm going to use a different brush for this, one that is one single line weight or one thickness, no matter how hard I press. So I'll use 2 fingers and tap to undo that. And now I'll go into my brush library and take a look here. So in the calligraphy folder, there's this brush here called Monoline. This is a really nice brush because no matter how hard you press, it's going to be one single line weight, no matter what. So I'm going to open up my brush library one more time, and I'm actually going to tap this monoline brush again to open up my brush studio. Now this in here will show you all the different settings that make up your brush shape or what your brush does or looks like. So there's a lot going on here. The only thing I really recommend you play around with when you're first starting out with the Procreate app is this stabilization amount. So if you look here under stabilization, it says streamline, and then it has amount here, and you can actually move this slider. So what this does is it actually changes how streamlined or smooth your brush strokes are. So if I have this all the way down at none, we can actually preview what our brush is going to look like here in our drawing pad. So you can tap this, tap clear drawing pad, and now I can see what this looks like. So you might notice it's not super smooth. I can still kind of see little bumps and wobbles in my brush stroke. But if I bring this streamline amount up, you'll see it's smoothing out my brush strokes. See how it's smoother? So play around with that. And this can be really helpful, especially with an illustration like this where it's more graphic and those smooth lines are really going to look nice. I'm going to bring the streamline amount up to about 70%, and that's going to help smooth out my brush strokes as I create this outline. So I'll go ahead and just tap done, and you can change that setting for each of your brushes separately. So for my monoline, it's set to 70%. I'll double check my layers, make sure I'm on that outline layer. And now I'll go ahead and with my brush tip size all the way up to 100% and my opacity up to 100%, I'm going to create my outline. So I'm definitely going to want to move the order of this in a little bit, but I'll just finish this outline first. So I think I want this outline in the very front. And don't be afraid to really rotate your canvas and zoom in and get nice and close. Okay, so let's go up to our layers and let's rearrange that so that the outline is at the very top. There we go. So now I'm going to do one more outline. So I'm going to tap the plus sign, tap to rename, and I'll just name this outline 2. And I will do this with this orange color from our palette. Always, always, always double check your layers to make sure you are on the correct layer before you start drawing. You don't want to be drawing and then all of a sudden realize you have the incorrect layer selected. Also, when you undo actions, you're not just undoing brush strokes. You can also accidentally undo creating a new layer or something like that, and then all of a sudden you're drawing on the previous layer you had selected, so just always double check. Okay, so now I'm pretty much done with all of the doodles that I want to do on this image. Now I want to show you why we created these elements on different layers. So let's take a look at this sun, and let's say I want to change the color of it. Okay, so now I'm pretty much done with all of the doodles that I want to do on this image. Now I want to show you why we created these elements on different layers. So let's take a look at this sun, and let's say I want to change the color of it. So let's say I want to change the color of this sun, but let's pretend I did all of these doodles on the same layer. So if you ever want to merge layers together, all you have to do is just take your fingers and pinch the layers and it'll squish them all together. So I have all of these on the same layer now. So you don't have to do this, I'm just showing you an example. But let's say I want to change the color of this sun. So maybe I'll do a color drop. So you'll see here when I try to do the color drop on that section, it's also changed the color of this over here, and that's because they're touching right here. So this really complicates things. It makes it difficult to edit that. Maybe I want to erase the sun, right? So if I wanted to erase, I'd have to get really careful over here, right? And if I want to erase the sun, now I'm also erasing the cloud, so it just doesn't work here. So I'm actually going to keep undoing until I undo merging the layers. So now I have my layers back here. But with this sun on its own layer, now I can easily do my color drop and change the color of this. That can take a little while. Another way you can change the color or play with the color of different elements or layers is you can actually play around with this up here. So this little magic wand, if you tap that, this opens up your adjustments. So these first 4 options here are your color adjustments. So I'm going to go ahead and tap hue, saturation, and brightness, and that'll bring up these 3 sliders down here. So this first one on the left will change the hue. So now, because the sun is on its own layer, I can really play around with just editing this here. And I can play around with the saturation, or how bright the colors are, right, how saturated, and then the brightness over here. So that's another reason why it's great to keep things on their own layer. Also, if I wanted to maybe change the size of this sun, I can easily do that. I can do that by tapping the transform tool. So that's this little mouse clicker icon here. So maybe if I wanted to make it a little bit smaller, I can do that. I could take this and move it around. So that is what the transform tool does. And we're going to play around with this more throughout the rest of our lessons in this class as well. So I'll go ahead and use 2 fingers to undo. And there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and organize my layers just a little bit more. So maybe I want to group these outline layers together. So to do that, instead of just merging them together, you can actually group layers together. So to select multiple groups, all you have to do is swipe the layers to the right. So now I have both of these selected, and now I can tap group up here. So now there's a little drop down arrow that I can tap to open the group or close the group. I can even tap and rename the group. So I will name this outlines. And now with those grouped together, I can tap the transform tool, and now I can move these around together because they're grouped together, right? So I'll just undo that. I can even have groups within groups. So if I want to swipe right on all my doodle layers and tap group, I can change this group name to doodles. So I can close and open that group. I can hide the group, show the group, and now I have my photo and my doodles all on their own neat little group here. Now, if you ever have a group selected and you start trying to draw, it's going to open up this little window here with your layers. So basically, it's just trying to tell you, hey, you have a group selected, not a layer selected. You have to select a layer to draw on, right? So it needs to know where to put that brush stroke. So if you try and draw with a group selected, it's going to pop this up to allow you to easily select a layer to then start drawing in. Okay, so now I want to play with getting some different color combinations with these doodles. So before I do anything, I'm going to back out to my gallery and I'm actually going to duplicate this project. I'm going to duplicate it because I don't want to lose any of these layers or any of my work. I like this color combination, but I want to play around with it, but I'm going to duplicate it first to save this work. So I'm going to tap select my artwork, and then tap duplicate. And that's going to make a copy with the layers and everything. So I can tap this X, go into the copy I just made. If you open up the layers, you'll see all the layers are there. But what I'm going to do is play around with the colors here. So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to merge all of the doodle layers together. So not the photo layer, just the doodles. So remember, I'm just going to take those layers and pinch them together. So I'm going to tap and rename this doodles 1. So I have those all on the same layer. So I did that because I want to actually play around with doing some color adjustments on all the layers as a whole. So I like this color option, so I'm first going to actually duplicate this layer so that I have this color option saved. So to duplicate a layer, you just swipe it to the left and then tap duplicate. This is also how you can delete layers. So I'll duplicate that, and now with that new layer selected, I'm going to tap on that magic wand to open up our adjustments, tap hue, saturation, and brightness, and now if I play with these sliders, I can get some really fun different color combinations. So I might find a couple that I like, play around with the saturation. That's kind of nice. If I go up to my layers, I can swipe this again, tap duplicate, and I can even play with some other color adjustments. So you can even play with the color balance, curves, or even this gradient map is fun to play with. So Procreate has these fun color gradients that you can also tap to open and play with how much of each color is in your illustration. And if you ever want to close this, you can either tap on a different tool or just tap that tool again. So what I want you to do is to play with the color adjustments and get some different colors going on. So now I want to show you how we can actually export or share our project. So to do that, you're going to tap this wrench in the top left corner to open up your actions, go to share. And we have some different file types here. So this first one being Procreate. So you can actually save it as a Procreate file. If you're really attached to a piece of art or you've been working on it for a long time, I highly recommend saving it as a Procreate file and saving it on a thumb drive or to your computer or something, because if your iPad breaks, you could potentially lose all of your artwork. So if you have that file saved somewhere else, you could bring that file back into your new iPad later on and still have the layers and everything intact. You can also save it as a PSD or a Photoshop file. You can save it as a PDF, but if you just want to save it as an image file, generally you're going to stick with JPEG or PNG. So JPEG is going to be a much smaller file size, so either one works. So I'm going to go ahead and just save this as a JPEG, and it'll export it, and then you can decide where to save it to. So you can airdrop it to another device, or I'm just going to tap Save Image, and that is going to save it to my iPad photo library. Something else that's really cool is you can tap the wrench and go to Video, and you can actually watch a time-lapse replay of everything you've done to create your artwork. So that's actually really fun to share if you want to. You can export the time-lapse video. If it's a really long video, you can shorten it to 30 seconds, but ours is really short, so we only have the full-length option, and you can export that and share it however you want to. And when you're exporting, if you want to export all of these different color options, you'll have to turn on the layer of whichever one you want to export, and you'll have to share each of those separately if you want to save them. All right, that's about it. I cannot wait to see you guys for the next week.